everyone, and welcome back to our video series on parent management. In today's video, I'll be talking about how to most effectively use something that we call point programs. So we've talked in different videos about positive consequences, like we've talked about praise, for example, and it's one of the most powerful ways that we have that we could influence, the behavior of our kids. And we've already talked about praise in our first video. So if you haven't seen that, look back in our feed, and that might be really helpful because it's part of the point program that we'll talk about today. So today I'll just focus on the point piece as a positive consequence and how we can use that when your child does the behavior that you're hoping to see. The reason we talk about points is because they can be really helpful for kids because they're really concrete and tangible. So it can be just that extra little reinforcement that they get for doing something that you would like them to do more of. And points, when you're using a point program, can be really anything you choose. Lots of parents will use the little stars or tally marks. If you have little tickets, you could use that, or any tokens to collect, you could use that as points too. And you'll want to give points whenever your child engages in the specific behavior you want them to develop, so kind of right away, as soon as you can, and consistently too. So you might be thinking that your child shouldn't really earn anything for good behavior, and that it should simply be expected and something they do because that's how you should behave. And to a certain extent, I definitely think that way too. We definitely don't want to be praising our children for every single thing they do. However, if there's certain behaviors that your child struggles with, which is really, really normal for anyone, and for kids especially as they're growing up, praise and point programs can really help to support your child while they learn and get better at whatever behavior that they're struggling with. And then the points can also really help with motivation too. And all of us need a little bit of motivation sometimes to do stuff, especially stuff that's hard for us. So just like with any other strategies that we've talked about, you don't have to use point programs for every single behavior. Just consider this another tool in your toolbox for maybe some complex behaviors or some that are really challenging, or when other things haven't really worked out as much as you would have liked them to. So let me describe how to most effectively use a point program. And there's also a linked handout that's really helpful to show how you could make your own. It has kind of a template. So just to define what a point program is, to make sure that we all have the same understanding, a point program is a way of administering rewards to develop positive behaviors. And then it also helps with structuring those rewards that you give and giving a little bit of structure to the whole idea of monitoring behavior and rewarding positive behavior. And the points that you award will essentially work like money that your child earns for behaviors and that you want them to develop. And then your child can spend the points that they earn just like money. So the things that your child can spend their points on could be things like privileges, fun activities, or other things like small toys or even snacks. But overall, a point program usually has 5 key components. The first, like a lot of the strategies we cover, before you start using it, you want to clearly define for yourself and then also for your child what behaviors can earn points. The more specific you can be, the better it is. For example, if you're thinking about chores, saying helping with chores for 15 minutes every day, rather than just saying help with chores, is much more specific and much more clear to both you and your child for when you would be rewarding those points. Another example would be saying eating all of your vegetables at dinner rather than just saying eat more vegetables, or saying something like use the words please and thank you rather than saying be polite. So those are just ways to help make everything more concrete and help tell your child what you're really looking for. And then the second main component is to choose something that you can use for the points. You could use a whiteboard to write down check marks or tally marks, little smiley faces or stars. It doesn't really matter. You could also use a jar to collect pennies or other little tokens that you have flying around. Anything like that. That is not very important what you choose for that. And then third, you want to have a way to keep track of those points. So you could either use a chart, which is in the handout that we have, to write down how many points your child has earned. And then you could have that chart on a refrigerator or in their room or anywhere that's kind of easy to see throughout the day. And then the fourth component is to specify how many points your child can earn for a behavior. So you could give more points for really complex or really challenging behaviors or behaviors that don't happen so often. For example, getting ready for bed might have that only really happens once a day and it has multiple steps. So that could be worth more points. And then you could give fewer points for something that's much easier or more that happens really often throughout the day, like using the words please and thank you. And then fifth, you will need to develop what we call a reward menu. And that's a really key point of the point program. And on this reward menu, you will list the options that your child has for rewards and then how many points each of the rewards can be bought for. So remember, the rewards can include privileges like extra TV time or activities like going to the park or other things like small toys or snacks. And there's a great list on the linked handout with a lot of ideas for different age ranges too. Just try to give a variety of rewards that are possible. It can be great too to have your child help you in selecting the rewards. What I like to do is have the parent have a pre-selected list, a longer list, and then with your child, you've already approved this longer list. With your child, you can then make a smaller list of rewards that they would like to work for. That way you know they're not going to pick anything that you don't want them to pick. But it's nice to have a variety for kids because they feel a little bit more in control and make it a little bit more fun and special. And then they might also be more motivated if they helped picking them because that's something they really want to work for. And then I also like to put some smaller prizes for less points and then also some bigger rewards for more points. So if your child wants to save up for something extra special, there's a bigger reward there possible for them. But it is really important that you have those smaller rewards too, because that will help them keep motivated and won't take too long for them before they can earn a reward for the first time. And then another thing you want to keep in mind is that the rewards that you list are things that you can actually provide. Otherwise, the point program won't really be effective. And then we also want to make sure that the costs that you put on the rewards aren't too high. So even for the lowest ones, we want to make sure that those aren't too high, especially at the beginning of using a point program to keep your kids invested in it. We want to make sure that they can earn prizes frequently, at least I would say every other day. And so just to recap, before starting a point program, you want to make sure you have 5 steps. First, you need to identify the behavior that earns points. Then second, you want to pick something to use as points. Third, you want to identify how you will keep track of the points. Fourth, you need to specify how many points are earned for each behavior. And then fifth, you need to make a list of the rewards. And then once you did all those steps and you're ready, explain the program to your child and go ahead and try it out. So that is the basic premise of a point program. They can be pretty flexible in terms of fitting your needs and your family and what behaviors you're working towards. And before I end, I also just want to cover some troubleshooting tips because there's a lot of ways these could not go the way we plan. So as much as you can, try to award points as soon as you see the behavior and then also paired with praise. This will just make it much more effective. We talked about this in our praise video. Just try to be really immediate because that really helps kids link their behavior to that good outcome and reinforce for them that what they just did was what they should do again in the future. And then I already mentioned this earlier a little bit, but really that idea of having choices for rewards is pretty important. So a good rule of thumb that I like to use is to have 1 to 2 rewards that could be earned from one day of getting about 2/3 of the available points. So having a pretty good day. And then have 1 to 2 rewards that could be bought from having a really like a perfect day, or having a couple of good but not perfect days. And then have about 1 to 2 bigger rewards that might take a whole week of good days before they can be earned, but something that's maybe really exciting that that they would want to save up for and be motivated to try and get those points for. And then what can be helpful, again, with this being a little bit more of a structured strategy, set time aside, a consistent time at the end of each day to review the point program with your child so that they can see how many points they earned, and that gives you another opportunity to praise them and just remind them of all the great things they did to earn those points. And then you can do rewards at that time too. You can see, you got 4 stars, which could buy you a small reward, or you could save them and try to get a bigger reward throughout the week. And then there's also going to be lots of times where your child doesn't do the behavior that you are looking for or that was expected. So when that happens, just stay really matter of fact. Say something like, "Oh, you did not get a point this time, but you can earn one next time." Avoid trying to be nagging in that situation or trying to bribe them with points. So just remind them how they can earn the points in the future and move on. And then also keep an eye on how many points your child earns. So like I said, for it to be effective, we need kids to be able to buy rewards pretty frequently, especially at the beginning. So after 2 to 3 days, if your child has not earned a reward or is nowhere close to even earning a reward, you'll need to reconsider what you're giving points for, because it might just be too high for where your child's current level is. And you can use shaping here, which is another strategy we discussed, to kind of help your child work their way up to the behaviors you want to see. So if you're working on eating vegetables, maybe at the beginning your child earns a point for eating just 1 spoonful of vegetables. And then once your child does that consistently, you can increase the demands and slowly work your way up to maybe a full side dish of vegetables. And then just before I end, I always like to cover some questions that are common or that you might have. And one of them with this system is, you might be wondering if you really need a complex system like this. And the answer, it is obviously completely up to you what types of strategies you use, and to consider if you want to use a point system, it might be worth trying if you're having trouble remembering to give consistent praise, or if you're needing just a little bit of extra structure. So this point program gives a very structured approach to trying to change behavior. Praise on its own is a really good tool too, but it is often hard to remember to use it consistently. And when we don't use it consistently, it's not as effective. So a point program can really help with that. And then you might also be wondering if a point program, it might feel like bribery to you for good behavior. And I definitely understand how it feels that way, but it really isn't like that at all. We're just using a consistent approach, a consistent use of consequences to develop behaviors that are positive and that your child will keep even after you remove those rewards. So you're helping your child, really what you're doing is helping them practice behaviors that they may struggle with right now. And then once they no longer struggle, you can take the point system away, which is kind of the next question that comes up is, when and how do you stop the program? So with a lot of our other strategies, we always say when you consistently see that the behavior you want is what your child is now doing, then you can start fading out the point system. So if they're consistently cleaning up their toys after they play, you can tell your kid that you've grown up so much, or you're such a big girl now, you don't need the program as often. And then you can tell them, we'll only do it every other day, and then do that for a little bit. Then you can say, we'll only do it once a week now, and so forth. And then you can slowly fade it out. And often it just kind of fades out naturally as well, too. And if you've truly built a new habit, then you shouldn't really see the behavior that you built with the point system go away. So you could always reintroduce it if you're seeing anything like that. But once it's pretty consistent, you should see that continuing. So that was all we had on point programs. Let us know if you have any questions or which behaviors or rewards that you're using at home with your kids. And then also don't forget to check out the handouts for this video, which are really helpful for developing your own program at home. Thanks for watching.